and that's Susan Mepster, and she's the Director of Strategic Interdisciplinary Program Development at Kansas State University. So Susan.
Well, good morning, everybody. I appreciate you getting up bright and early after an unfortunate game last night. Hopefully a little bit of sleep took a little bit of the bruising off of it, and look forward to a great discussion this morning. As Bill mentioned, we're going to have two panels back to back, so we'll start with water quantity and go into water quality, although I bet you hear between the two of them that sometimes those two things are often very linked. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists just by name and their title, and then they'll have a chance to share a little bit more about their background and their perspectives and why they're here visiting with you this morning. And just because I know we have folks from all across the state, and when we talk about water quantity issues that can be very diverse, you'll notice from our panelists that most of them here are focused over the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, so that's really where we're going to focus a lot of our discussion today. So just to help level set some things, we're going to start with just a couple of slides, a little 101 on the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, just so that we can really dive into the questions and the discussion. So starting over here on my left, we have Larry Schiefrick. He's a state conservation engineer from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And then next to him is Shannon Kenyon, who's a district manager from the Northwest Groundwater Management District number 4. And then over here on my right is Pat Jansen. He's a farmer in South Central Kansas, an ILS farm manager. And then next to Pat, we have Wes McCary, who's a technology projects coordinator with the Kansas Water Office. And then last but not least, on the end is Brian Olson, who's the department head for Western Kansas Research and Extension. So you'll have a chance to learn more about these great speakers here in just a moment. If we can advance on, well, I have the thing. That's right. You gave me the whole instructions on how to do this. Very good. So this is a discussion. This is interactive. I'm going to throw this QR code and website up again at the end of the slides here. I want you throughout this panel discussion to pepper these folks with questions, comments, things that you want them to engage on. So again, I'll throw this code and that website up again at the last slide. Please use it. Please engage with this panel. The best panel discussion is when you really get to have a conversation with these really great people up here. So again, this is your group of panelists. You're going to learn more about them here in just a moment. So a little bit of level setting. The state of Kansas is very diverse, and when we talk about water issues, so on the western border with Colorado, we get fewer than 18 inches of precipitation in a given year, and then if you go all the way over to the Missouri border, more than 46 inches of precipitation in any given year. And so that really creates this dividing line where most of our panelists today kind of fall in this semi-arid conditions, and then the rest of the state leaning towards humid. It's really interesting. You don't see that same diversity of water precipitation when you go from the Missouri border all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, but we experience those extremes right here in our state borders. So we have two different sources of water supply in Kansas. Generally, western Kansas, under that gray outline, is what we call the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, so groundwater driven. And that as you go into eastern Kansas, all that network of blue is a network of surface water, rivers, streams, reservoirs. So when we talk about water quantity, there's water quantity issues statewide. A lot of what we're going to talk about today really falls under that Ogallala High Plains gray outline. And then the way that we make use of the water is very different. So we call this our Pac-Man map. It shows us by county the reported water use on a given year. And so the larger the pot and the larger that Pac-Man, the larger quantity of reported water use. And then the color of the pie pieces indicate how that water is put to use. So your eyes are probably drawn then to western Kansas, especially southwest Kansas. Large pies, large reported use of groundwater, mostly because, if you'll recall, that's where we get less precipitation, and a lot of that is to support agriculture, our state's largest economic driver. So then I'll let this map go through of really, when we talk about the water quantity challenges over the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, this shows you the changes in aquifer depth since 1996. And so there are areas of the aquifer that have experienced greater than 100 feet of decline over that time period. And so the folks that are your panelists today are actively engaged in slowing that decline and where possible, reaching points of stability. So with that, again, this is the QR code. I'm going to leave it up here throughout the duration of our panel discussion. And so I hope that you pepper them with questions, ideas, and really engage with this great group of panelists up here this morning. And so I'm going to start with Larry, and we're going to go all the way down to Brian and just give them a chance to open up, tell you a little bit about themselves, their current position, and most importantly, why they're on a panel with you today to talk about water quantity. So Larry.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Larry Schiefrick. I'm the State Conservation Engineer for NRCS. Grew up in eastern Sheridan County. Our farm is in GMD4, where Shannon's groundwater management district. My dad put his well in 1976, and we started out with gated pipe. My sister's here, Eileen. We spent a lot of time moving gated pipe as kids. A lot of varying slope on that ground, incredibly inefficient by today's standards, but that's where we started. Over time, we've gone to center pivots, we've gone to more efficient nozzles, so I've got a little bit of firsthand knowledge on irrigation technology, getting it to be a little more efficient, and it's a journey. It's a journey that each producer is on, and we start where they're at. And help them get to the next level. So became state conservation engineer just a little bit over a year ago, and so relatively new to the leadership position. It's been a learning experience, but I've gained a lot of respect for leaders, for legislators, and the hard work it takes to make change happen. So with that, I'll hand it over to Shannon.
Thank you, Larry. I'm Shannon Kenyon. I'm the manager for the Groundwater Management District number 4 out of Colby. I've got a background really in education as well as geoscience and public policy and administration. I kind of started out in 2007 working for the Division of Water Resources at the Stockton Field Office. And from there in 2015, I started work at the GMD4 office and have been in a manager position there since then. Either the assistant manager as well as now the manager position. I reside in Graham County, where we do farm and ranch. We do have some irrigation and run cattle. So no, not only do I work in the industry, but live and breathe it every day as well. So thanks.
My name's Pat Jansen. My family and I farm headquartered south of Kinsley, Kansas. Before we get too far, I would like to take an exception to one of Susan's slides. It had us classified as semi-arid. We've been upgraded to fully arid. Been involved with, I'm currently serving as president of the Water Protection Association of Central Kansas. It's an irrigator, ag water user group, tries to represent that class in Topeka, wherever it may be. Through that, we've gotten involved with originally with the Tech Farm program, and now we're into the Wes's New WISE program through the Kansas Water Office. We've done a lot of work on our farm through the CSP program, utilizing technology, things like that to reduce water use, and we just keep tinkering and tweaking and trying to get more efficient.
Good morning. I'm Wes McCary. I'm the Tech Projects Coordinator for the Kansas Water Office. I'm right at the 30-year mark of being in a collection of civil engineering and technical vocational education, as well as in precision agriculture. I'm the former director of precision agriculture from Northwest Kansas Technical College, where we had a water technology farm at the same time. Pat Jansen and many of the some other people in the room launched their research facilities. We were invited at that time to begin to try to find out on a non-research level the things that were working, that were adoptable in the fields that producers felt like were viable to them, and that has turned out to be a very critical step in the adoption of practices and technologies We've seen a lot of things that work in a research environment, but when we go to producers, it becomes a matter of trust. And so I currently manage the WISE program, the Water Innovation Systems and Education program for the state. And we think that we have, with help of Mr. Pat Jansen and others, we feel like we've come to a conclusion of the toolbox of many practices and technologies, and we're really trying to work towards getting producers to adopt and trust it and own it. So.
Yeah, Brian Olson, Department Head for Western Kansas, and so I was area agronomist for K-State about 12 years ago, then joined Bear Crop Science and was manager of the Water Utilization Learning Center up in Gothenburg, Nebraska, and now is back as Department Head for Western Kansas, and so Western Kansas is made up of Hayes, Garden City, Tribune, and Colby, so all the faculty there at those stations, that's the Western Kansas team. And so water has been something that over my career, I've definitely done a lot of work on that. And for those of you familiar with Northwest Kansas, started that Cover Your Acres Winter Conference up there. And so water's been extremely important to me. Back to the gated pipe. I think many of us had a lot of fun doing that. I always remember working for farmers and then making sure you're not on the other end of where the skunk is, right? That comes out. So, there is a couple initiatives that I do want to highlight before we jump into the questions that will be coming out. So you may have heard that K-State has launched the Water Institute. This is a university level initiative. It's taking all the colleges that are at K-State and getting them to buy into this discussion around water, so water quantity, water quality, and unlocking the potential at K-State, and then also partners with other universities as they want to participate. So that is a big initiative. So if you've not had the opportunity to meet with President Linton, that man is a fountain of positivity. And so he is a can-do person, and it's great to have an Aggie in the top spot at K-State. And then what we're going to focus in out in western Kansas is the TAP, so Testing Ag Performance Solutions. And back to what Wes was talking about, the toolbox, helping farmers understand how to use the technologies out there. If you can envision that we give you the opportunity, if you want to, or your farmers, to participate in one of 25 teams. Let's say we choose the crop, and then we give you 6 to 8 different variables that you, as that farmer team, can decide how you want to manage. Do you want to irrigate? Do you want to put on the fertilizer? What seeding rate you want to use? And so then you compete against your fellow farmers out there in that. And then obviously at the end of the year, there's a lot of peer-to-peer discussion, but you can see who had the best production, who is the most profitable. And so we think that that's going to be a nice way to help farmers understand how to use that technology. They can, again, work together on a team. There's always new technologies coming out. And so if you want to try something, instead of trying it on your farm, you can actually join the TAPS and then try it out there and compare it to what other people are doing. So we think that's going to be a pretty big initiative for Western Kansas. We're going to have it at Colby and Garden City this next year. And I look forward to having a lot of farmers involved with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for that great introduction. I'm going to kick off with one of the questions, starting with Pat. And my apologies, Pat, that I maybe upgraded you to the semi-arid. So with that in mind, if you could share with the audience just a little bit about what you view to be the most critical water challenges in your region, and what's working the most to address those challenges, maybe what's not working.
Okay. Challenges we've got in our area, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. It's a critical wildlife refuge located at Stafford, Kansas. Their water supply is the Rattlesnake Creek. Right now we have a pretty significant fight going on between the irrigators and the refuge. The refuge has water right that was filed for in 1957, which makes them senior to, I believe, 95% of the wells in the basin. This project affects about 1,500 pivots, huge economic issue as in our area we've got agriculture and we've got oil. And that's pretty much it for the economic drivers in our area. So we're really working hard to try and come up with a scenario where the where the refuge and the irrigators can continue to exist while we still support that local economy. Challenges, Wes mentioned our toolbox. We've been through the Nature Conservancy, K-State, several other partners, we've participated in a conservation innovation grant over the last, supposed to be 3 years, ended up being 4 because of a layover for COVID. But through that process, we've come up with a set of parameters that, when implemented, will typically reduce water use on the average irrigator by 15–20%. And it doesn't involve reduced production, minimum input crops, any of those things. It just comes down to getting the equipment functioning properly to apply water evenly over the field, soil moisture monitors, those type of things, telemetry on pivots. And the biggest one is irrigating. Then this hasn't been an issue for the last 2 years, but irrigating to make better utilization of rainfall when we do receive it. The biggest issue we've got is within our CIG grant, we've got some really great cooperators through K-State and contract personnel with the Nature Conservancy, and those people are out there every 2 weeks. They're meeting with the irrigators. They're spending time. They're developing a level of trust and comfort with operating those pivots in a new way. And that has been the biggest challenge in this thing, is producer adoption. We can hang technology on pivots, we can get them to where they glow in the dark, and it isn't going to matter if we don't have that comfort and that trust from the producer standpoint that, yes, this is going to work and it's not going to be economically detrimental to my operation. Our matrix is, we believe that irrigation improvement is approximately 40% mechanical or technological and 60% cultural. And that 60% is what we're struggling with in our projects.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. And I think the other panelists have a similar perspective of the cultural piece. It really comes down, it doesn't matter which programs, policies, practices you have to offer, it comes down to people. So there's a question from the audience, because we've learned here over the past few days about the influx of funds for technology adoption. Mostly, as we talk about it, is often characterized to improve water efficiency, but we really need things to help drive down pumping demands. So how do we ensure that this investment from taxpayer dollars will result in a reduction in pumping levels? I might turn this to Wes and to Shannon to react to that. So how do we use those funds for technology adoption to actually drive down water use? Shannon.
Well, we've been doing cost share dollars since, well, in GMD4 anyway, since 2015. And really what kind of started out was with the soil moisture probes and getting those out. And, excuse me, we're finding that just like with the soil moisture probes, I kind of collected my own data on those, and we're getting about a 20% water savings just off the utilization of the soil moisture probes. Now, as you know, some people get them, do they use them? And that's a big question, and that's kind of where we're going to move forward too, is making sure on the backside of things that we're not just putting these things or technology out in the fields, and then it's kind of do or die situation. We need to follow up and make sure that it's getting utilized correctly, things like that, and we've really kind of moved towards that a little bit with our public outreach and how is this going, and it really. it boils down to, and like Pat had mentioned, the culture of it. And it's just these little things with the cost sharing things that begin to, develop that culture that, okay, I got one of these soil moisture probes and I'm doing this. And so you go and you talk to your neighbor about it. Well, I started doing this. And now they realize, hey, I'm in the same boat as this guy, or lack thereof. And, we're trying things, and it's definitely kind of getting a community together as to, okay, we're actually all working towards conservation, but we're all doing it differently. And so, it's the communication that's involved with that is really what's pushing things forward. So we want to be able to continue to provide them with the cost share dollars, and the technology to put out there to become more efficient. But not just one or two things. We want to leave it open to them to choose what it is they want to implement. But the big thing is we got to have somebody out there going, okay, you've implemented this. How are you doing with it? Excuse me again. As well as how can we move forward with it and make it better, and just making sure that we're getting the best usage of those dollars with the technology that they've chosen to use. And there's going to be things out there with that didn't work for me, but it did the neighbor. So, maybe we try something else, or let's swap some stuff around. But yeah, it's definitely moving forward, and I really think it's a great opportunity.
Awesome, thanks.
I wanted Shannon to go first because it really does this. It's been my phrase for the whole conference, this alley-oop thing. When I was in Goodland teaching a vocational ag program, and a big part of that was irrigation technology, and the big part of that was management. And management is a lifestyle, it's a mentality, it's a psychology. And I noticed something with young people who were, working, they came right off the farm, they're working on the farms, and then a lot of times, what happened as we began to see ALEMA enacted in District 4 was once producers knew imminently that they had to conserve, they began to reach out to everybody, including K-State Research and Extension and the Water Tech Farm Network. They began to reach out to us in vocational agriculture, and it created this culture that said, I need to do something, Wes, what do I do? And I can tell you I probably got 100 different phone calls from all hours of the day and night, and sometimes they send them in with junior coming into my program and say, well, how do we do this? What do we do this? Everybody was looking for the silver bullet, and there wasn't a silver bullet. It took me a while to realize it wasn't in the nozzles, it wasn't in the water, soil moisture probes, it wasn't in the telemetry. It became the heads-up mentality. When you begin to look at water, or it gets on your phone, where a telemetry box, it's a cheap adoption. When you have out of sight, out of mind, you don't have adoption, you don't have management. But when people begin to think about water, because they had to think about water, and they were like, well, how much do I have, Shannon? What's my allocation, Shannon? And you bit off a lot of work, you and your staff, because producers were now coming in going, well, how much do I have? How much do I have? How do I do this calculation? As soon as producers have the data in front of them, they will manage what they have. That's number one takeaway I've seen, and we're still pushing that in the WISE program today. I know K-State's still pushing that today. So it's not a matter of which technologies, which hybrids of crops, what crop rotation. It really comes down to when you are actively involved, we begin to see water being saved because they had to. And we've seen that scale to other regions, and it is scaling to other regions. And then I won't get into the other things. I think that, number one, answers the question that was being asked by the audience is, how do we know that it's going to have a measurable difference? Because it already has. The cost share programs that came out adjacent to or at the same time as some of these other water restrictions, including the water banking and things that are going on in your area, when you are forced to look at it, you will manage water, and we have seen it. No matter who's managing it. Doesn't matter if it's K-State, if it's vocational, if it's WISE, it's Water Tech Farms, if it's CIG, and there's other groups that are doing it too. You will have measurable, and we have seen over and over, you have measurable water conservation when you have management by producers.
Excellent, thank you both. So another question that came from the group, this one's for you, Brian. What role will the new Water Institute at K-State play with producer and conservation partners in different parts of the state? And is it only for research?
No, it's definitely definitely not only for research. We see this as a way to get folks aligned across the state. So again, we're having this discussion. So Susan is actually the chair, and I'm on that steering committee, and we've had a limited number of meetings, but we are working through the governance of what that looks like at the university level, getting, again, those different colleges to buy into this. But there will definitely be an outreach component. We want to make sure we are meeting the needs of Kansans and really setting ourselves on a path toward where we can maybe not worry so much about where we're going with water in 10, 15 years, but we've reached a level out there where for water quantity, we've got some tools in place and we're seeing things level off. And then back to water quality issues, cleaning up a number of issues on that so we don't have the algae blooms and so on. There's many issues on water, and we really see this Water Institute as pulling partners together from across the state to talk through that and then make sure everybody's going in the same direction because, again, that's what is demanded by our folks out there that have water issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Another question from the audience, and this one's for you, Larry. What role do you feel that NRCS programs should play in the future of the Ogallala?
Okay, as far as NRCS, it's no different than anything that we've always done, financial and technical assistance. And being the engineer, I'm going to talk more about the technical end of it. We can help a lot get real quick wins on efficiency. We've got our sprinkler, micro irrigation, irrigation water management. All of those are tools, but what we ultimately want to get to is good management. The sprinkler, the micro irrigation, all the other practices, we want to get to good management so we can manage that water appropriately. I will say it's going to be different no matter where you're at. When Pat said he had to reduce his wells down to 750 gallon a minute, that was something for me to wrap my head around. We've got Representative Minix here that's leaking multiple wells together to run one pivot. So we got to know where we're at. We got to know who we're talking to, and every producer is going to be a little bit different. So we've got our toolbox of practices, but we still got to be good planners. We still have to be good communicators. So, and then Weston mentioned trust, and trusting us and trusting the technology. That takes time. It's going to take multiple visits, but it's a journey, and it's something that we have to learn where that producer is at. We started out with gated pipe with probably slopes that were too steep on our farm in 1976, and we've grown since then. So our position as NRCS is to take that producer to the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. So we may not get to automated groundwater probes. We may not be looking at something that's quite as automated and technical, but we can get to the next step. So that's where I see NRCS going. It's going to be individualized, no different than anything else we do.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. So this next question is kind of, I'll start with Shannon and then maybe go to Pat for some reaction. So just a curiosity, so the first local enhanced management area in the state, or LEMA, was in Northwest Kansas in Sheridan County in your district, and then you were the first district to have a district-wide LEMA. A lot of work went into that, but now, what are some of the successes that you've seen because of that? And then Pat, just a reaction, is there an application for a tool like that in your region? So we'll start with you, Shannon.
Well, the success has come, I mean, obviously we've extended the life of the Ogallala Aquifer in our area. And just in Sheridan 6 alone, KGS and their numbers, I'm not one that I don't have time to crunch the numbers they do, but they give me great data, and I trust it wholeheartedly. And that's that Sheridan 6 itself has doubled the life of their aquifer. So that just looking at those numbers, that is a huge success. The GMD4 Lima, which is pretty much district-wide, but those areas that don't have a decline issue are not included in that. The success, it's not very restrictive. I first one to admit that. However, what I find the true success of that is definitely in the culture that we've talked about earlier. And I'll start with Sheridan 6. When they're down to 11 inches, 55 inches over 5 years, and they've got a lot of flexibility with that. But when one of the huge success stories I like to say is during that first hearing process, we had some folks that came in and definitely were opposed to that Lima, and they testified against it. One of those gentlemen was very, very vocal about it and has been for a long time. But then when we re-upped it in 2018. He's the only one that shows up to testify, and he changed his tune. For both of them, he has now testified in support of that Lima. And I get this, I love it. You made me manage my water, and I'm making more money. I'm being more profitable. And I'm like, that right there, is that culture shift. And then even with the GMD4 Lima, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys know, but we got taken to court over that thing. We won, but there's one guy that was on that list of petitioners that came into me a couple years ago that wanted help with their water use report. And I was like, great. And he said the same thing, And so it's that they were forced to manage their water, and now they're seeing the benefits of it. And with that, I've heard the word several times here today, is that trust. They've learned to develop that trust with me. And so now just recently I went out and did some public meetings, which I try to do about 3 times a year. And now, in an area that really I got a lot of backlash from for making restrictions, I get this, well, why didn't you restrict us a little more? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to make you people happy. So, but no, I mean, I can't speak for the board of directors, but, or at least the ones that are going to be planning for this in the future, but that's definitely public comments that I'm getting. And so now they're like, no, they feel good about what they're doing in their management, and they want to squeeze back more, but there's this resistance because, well, if you're not going to make my neighbor do it, why would I do it? So, that's where the carrot comes as far as the Limas go.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. Reactions, Pat?
Okay, in our area with the situation we're into, this has been going on since sometime in the 1980s. And like it or not, regulation brings innovation at times, and I'll probably regret saying that later. Yes, a LEMA, a WCA, any of those programs would be very successful in our area. I mean, if you look at the caliber of people that are operating these irrigated farms in Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, I mean, they're innovators, or they wouldn't be here. The economics don't support poor actors in this thing. The issue we've got is the ROI, return on investment with water, it's diminishing as you overwater, but if you under-apply, the loss for that water you didn't apply is significant and can be so in one event. So the challenge in our area is, starting in the 1980s with Quivira, the issues they've had with irrigators impairing stream flow in the creek, is that this thing's come to a head and then it's backed off. It's come to a head and then it's backed off. And so the producers from their side of the table have effectively, it's like losing a relative or a friend. They've been in anger, denial, then back to anger, then to denial, then back to anger, then to denial. And we have not gotten to acceptance yet. And acceptance and a cultural shift is a common theme here. You're going to hear it again and again. But acceptance is where the people in the Sheridan 6 got to. They said, look, we've got to make some changes if we're going to continue to support our communities, support the economy. And so all the voluntary measures in the world are not going to be effective until you get to the point of acceptance.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Pat. So a question then for Brian, some curiosity about learning more about that competition-based activity or program that you talked about, the TAPS program. And in particular, it sounds like it generates a lot of results or data. What's done with that information? How can people access it?
Yeah, so Testing Ag Performance Solutions, or TAPS, just so folks are aware, we were able to go out and recruit and bring down Darren Rudnick, who is the founder of the TAPS program from up in Nebraska. So he's wearing purple, so we've got to win over Nebraska. So, that data is set up. So I will say that there is the production type of data where we're comparing practices, and we can go through there and look at that. But then there's also this other type of data about the economics and how decisions are made. And so again, that is the type of information as we look at multiple TAPS competitions. We can really go through there and look at that data. It's anonymous data, so again, we're not. What we don't want to do is, for example, if a farmer comes in and competes, and they end up at 25th out of the 25, right? So it's just going to be team 25, right? We want to highlight people that do really well, but then obviously provide an opportunity for people to learn from their counterparts and learn from the extension folks. Again, we all know farmers that extension folks are great, but it's really that peer-to-peer, that trusting your fellow farmer and what they learn from that competition, that will help move the needle and change that culture on how we go about manage water better. So again, we'll retain that data and combine it with other sites, but make sure it's anonymous and gain insights from that. But we're really excited to have this program because we think it's going to be an innovative way for farmers to learn, and not just farmers. So again, I think it would be really good for folks in this room to have a team or bankers. There's a big discussion. We have to change the narrative on some of our bankers that it's not just about pump, pump, pump. We've got to go out there and manage that water. We got to look at the long-term real estate value there. 10 years from now, we don't want that to be dry land. We want it to still be irrigated. So what does that look like? Having them being involved and learn more about the technologies will help them adopt, be willing to have farmers go out there and invest in those.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So, Wes, this next one is for you. So, in your role, you have the opportunity to really engage with a number of industry partners and producers. You're almost always at the forefront of what the next greatest technology is. So, in your perspective, what excites you the most about a technology that's out there, or maybe just out there, not quite ready for adoption?
I've also seen over the last 10 years, Susan, what's the next greatest disaster.
Yeah.
We've seen some of that. To speak to that, and to dovetail off of what Brian was just saying here, one of the great things about, like when GMD4 enacted their LEMA, we had a lot of producers that were in the area. They went up to Nebraska and participated in the UNL TAPS program because they were desperate. We didn't know what was going to work to start addressing this question, Susan. They didn't know what was going to work, so they went to Nebraska to participate to see what combination of field practices and technologies were going to work. The other thing is that through growing attention to the Ogallala and to the High Plains Aquifer, a lot of our vendors and our service providers, they had an opportunity to absolutely dial in and perfect, sometimes through flames and resurrection. They had an opportunity to develop and really dial in the technology for the needs of our area. And we also have some technology that came right out of the Kansas, right out of the heart of Kansas, in the middle of needing to work with DWR and some other, to tackle some other challenges that were here, and it kind of spurred on some innovation internally, as well as, we had Canadian companies, Israeli companies, European companies, and a lot of California companies coming out here. But we were fortunate that right as we decided to do something, and as legislation was getting there and cost share dollars were getting there, that the industry was ready to support what we were doing. And that gets into like crop genetics, that got into pivot design, telemetry, and remember one time, it was probably about 6 years ago, Jerry Moran stopped by the college and he was saying, and he pulled me aside, and I was on some rant that I usually am on about, look at this. I was doing show and tell, and he really enjoyed that. And he's like, Wes, in a nutshell, not so many words, what's the biggest pinch point that we have going on out here? And at that time I said rural internet. Because we've seen where you can go out there and put these wonderful things like soil moisture probes or AgSense or whatever it is, and suddenly it doesn't talk to AT&T or Verizon or whatever. And suddenly you have this Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Some of you are old enough to know what I'm talking about. You have this really high-tech stuff out there, and it falls on its face because we don't have the telemetry. But one of the biggest things that I see coming down the pipe, Susan, and it's getting a lot of traction by major companies, is the automation, not just telemetry, but it's the autonomous. There is a company out there called Autonomous Pivot, but they have spent their time, they've worked with the Water Tech Farm and WISE program, and they continue to do development with producers like Lee Wheeler and Pat Jansen on some of the stuff you guys are doing. And I like the idea of setting a thermostat in my house, whether it be hot outside or cold, and that thermostat does the work. We are the brains. We don't have to do we don't have to be the miners in the coal mines. We can design machines to do this. And I'm going to use an analogy and bring it full circle here. In the 80s, the domestic motor lines were still having union workers sitting up there putting widgets in and rivets in and building cars manually, while Honda and Toyota, who were not American companies at the time, were developing welding robots. They automated, but they also took people out of harm's way. And some people will laugh at what I'm going to say. They took our jobs. They didn't take our jobs. We as humans are made to manage things and replicate our best moments constantly. And when we can put that into machine technology, there is a time and place for it. It also can take us out of harm's way. So I don't know anybody who wants to take their thermostat off their wall in the name of, I want to stay in control of my life. Because I don't want to get up at 3 in the morning and adjust the heat. I want it to do what I told it to do. We're now at the point with center pivot technology that once we dial it in and we make sure the pressures coming out of the wells match what the pivots are doing, that's the need for the audits we've been talking about. Up front, we have to audit the machine before we start putting any decorations on the Christmas tree, as I call it. And number two, we are at the point with the technology that it can read the soil in front of itself, make a determination, and do an if and then. Our center pivot technology, I was telling this to some of our NRCS friends a couple weeks ago, they didn't realize that the soil survey, the Surgo data, was actually being used, the digital data was actually being used to do variable rate, it's in the tractors. We're using Surgo data to drive tractors and do machine control and do pivot control, and they were like, you're using that stuff from the 50s to change the nozzle patterns? Because that's all we have. We're at a point now where instead of using antiquated data or having to get a monster survey done on the field, whether it be electromagnetic or grid sampling, the pivot can adjust itself to the real-time conditions and make a determination of if and then, if and then. Some of them, they're even working on technology, and this scares people, I understand. It can know that it can log into the internet remotely from a pivot in rural Kansas, and it'll predictively say, what's my actual chance of rain coming in? So you're talking about leaving enough room in the profile to capture that rain if it comes in. We don't want to go to complete field capacity. It'll go, all right, I'm going to always leave an inch. In case that rain comes, I can capitalize on it. And the machine will not only read what's in front of it, but log into the internet to know what the chances, the statistical chance is that it's going to catch a rain. That is where we're at. And that is being perfected in Kansas right now. And Kansas dollars are being used on that technology and has been now for 5 strong years. So I'm excited about it.
That's pretty mind-blowing indeed. Just a reminder, keep the questions coming in. You've got the QR code, you've got the website. This is great to see them coming in, and we'll keep going answering your questions. So this one's for you, Larry. So the folks in the room really are probably the first line of defense of working directly with a producer or a community member of trying to make sense of this myriad of programs that are out there or tackling a really unique problem at a farm level. What advice do you have for the folks in the room in that capacity?
Well, one thing that's come very clear in the last, I was at the Governor's Water Conference last week and here this week, is that this problem is bigger than one person, bigger than NRCS. We need our partners to work together on this. So there are a lot of programs. I've been talking to Wes about this, how we need to get together and not only just not trip over each other, but work together towards a common goal. So that's going to include Kansas Water Office. It's going to include the GMDs. I think it's become very clear over the last 2 weeks that I need to go home and do my homework and provide some leadership in this area. As far as NRCS goes, we've never had more funds for irrigation water management right now. We want to make sure that we work with our partners to make sure all of this money is being used effectively. We're expanding at a rapid rate because our money that's at the door has been increased at a rapid rate, so, and will continue to increase. For NRCS, we have EQIP, we have IRA funds that brings a lot of money to the door, and so I think we're at the early stages of deciding how we're going to disseminate that to the field and work with our partners to do that. The other program, RCPP, we're working with Division of Conservation on a possible RCPP to work with the GMDs, to work with the Water Office, to get additional technical assistance out there. That may be a missing link or a need that we have, is to expand our expertise on irrigation technology and helping our producers plan with that. We're looking at some really incredible technology, but the best technology is the one that's used. And I said it before, we want to get to good management, better management, and whatever tool we use to get there doesn't really matter to me as long as we are increasing the management skills of our producers. So in short, we've got EQIP, we've got RCPP, and we've got our partners, and it's going to be, we're still under development as far as how that's going to look.
Shannon, you often play that role too, similar to the folks in the room, where the producer or community members coming directly to you to ask for questions, maybe even about programs that aren't a GMD program. What advice do you have for the folks in the room?
Well, before I open up my mouth too far, I do want to say really a big shout out and a huge thanks to the DOC managers that have really been a really great asset to us in helping us navigate some of these cost share programs and things like that. You know, they've been a great help. I'm one of those people that if I don't know the answer, I will find the answer for you. And so it would be, you know, there's money coming, there's programs coming, there's all sorts of things, you know, for a producer. Just kind of, I guess where I start out with is I just want to sit down and listen to them, and you tell me what it is you're wanting, what you're needing, and then that tells me what avenue I go down or who we need to get in touch with. And so, at least in my role, I'm kind of the middleman, at least in knowing what I can do. It goes back to that trust factor too. They trust me to find out those answers for them, and I've got to be there for that. So that's what I do, is I find out where it's coming from and what I can do to help them. And, you know, so did that answer that?
Yeah, you bet. Great. So Pat, this next one is for you. The question was, what's the best way to start the conversation about irrigation efficiency related cost share options with producers affected by the Covera water rights issue? Is there a place for that conversation coming from the federal government with emotions being so high right now?
I guess where we're attempting to try and start that conversation is to generate curiosity and interest. We're in the process of compiling all the data from our CIG trials over the last 3 years. We've got a lot of good data. We had 36 different fields in that project with 30 cooperators. We've got, and then we're benchmarking them off each other using trying to utilize effective rainfall net irrigation to determine exactly, to come up with a standard matrix of how efficient was that producer. And, for instance, last year we've got 2 fields that are within 3 miles of each other. Irrigated corn crop, we had 1 field applied, I believe, 17.5 inches. We had another one 3 miles down the road applied 26. So, I mean, there's a huge spread there. The problem is most of the people in ag, over the course of my life, I've been lectured by cops, by teachers, by parents, you name it. I don't lecture well. Now, if I'm curious about something and I come to you and ask a question, all of a sudden we've both got a vested interest in the subject matter, and we can build a relationship from there. But I think the biggest challenge in this thing, especially from the standpoint of the people that are out there legitimately trying to help the producers, is to make sure you don't come into it telling them they've been doing it wrong. Because that, there's enough animosity in this thing without bringing it down to the working level of the project where we're at. I mean, if you come into it with the heart of a teacher, and I think you'll find that people will embrace it once they develop a comfort level with it, but it's not an overnight process. I mean, it took us probably 4 or 5 years to get comfortable with everything we've been doing for the last 5 years. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. So we've talked a lot about technology as being part of the solution for reducing water use, but this question talks about what are some of those other infield management practices? And we might just start with Brian and kind of go down anybody that wants to react to it. So things like no-till, cover crops. What role have you seen them playing in optimizing water use?
Yeah, so strip till is an important part of when we look at production agriculture out there on irrigated ground. It allows farmers to still control or cover the ground in between those rows, and it did lead to some disease challenges because, again, you've got residue now on the surface versus clean till. But it's a good way to obviously get your fertilizer below the ground and, again, minimize evaporation off the soil surface. Weed control is another one of those issues out there that we all have to deal with that is really changing the dynamics when we look at managing water. There was, 10, 15 years ago, go out there, simple application of Roundup would take down about everything. Now we've got Palmer out there and kochia, very resistant, and so farmers are going back and starting to open the ground up using steel, and so that changes the dynamic, and we can definitely see a lot of that going on throughout western Kansas. So we have to employ different management techniques. Where does cover crops fit in? Do they shade the ground? And then instead of having a weed come up that you can't control with glyphosate, you've got a cover crop. But as we all know, if a cover crop goes too long, then it dries out the soil, and now we've got a problem in getting that crop emerged. So there's definitely more management out there, helping farmers understand that layering residuals is extremely important, and for managing those herbicide-tolerant weeds, and then using things like strip till will be very beneficial out there on some of those irrigated grounds, along with no-till, obviously, to reduce the amount of evaporation and trap that soil moisture.
I don't know if those of you that attended the Governor's Water Conference last week, you saw that we had a WISE panel, and on that panel you saw Mr. Pat Jansen here as well as Ryan Brady talk about in depth how they are working with cover crops in their production cycles, their row crop cycling. We're at the point with the WISE program, it's not a matter of if cover crop or not cover crop, it's which cover crop. What blends of cover crops? What works? Is it the cool season blends? Is it the warm season blends? A lot of you are experts on this in the room. And yes, it's a matter of does it raid some soil moisture from the crop? Yes. But Pat will be the first one to also tell you over the long term, you're getting these long-term moisture holding and nutrient holding capacity benefits beyond the short-term rating of that moisture. Did I capture that about right? The great thing is that we're starting to see also alternative rations that are going into protein agriculture. So we're looking at cover crops and cover forages as alternative food sources for cattle, triticales, some sedan grasses, and so on and so forth that we're trying to restructure what that feeding regime looks like in protein agriculture. So because we're already working with feedlots and dairies in western Kansas on water reclamation projects to try to further water, savings wherever we can, whether it be a municipality and saving water in Hayes, and now we're trying to scale that to places like Scott City and Colby. Whether it be feed yards and dairies, we're trying to conserve water there where we can and repurpose lagoon water. We're also trying to find out how we can continue with the viability of our economic viability in all of these ag resources, and feed them different, keep them healthy, and cover crops and forage crops are a big part of that. We're still in the middle of discovering that, and of course, there's the conservation aspect of all that and the benefits of that. And we're seeing some guys that are having some great results with implementing cover crops to push back that weed. There's no need to grow the weed resistance because they're actually keeping the palmer and the that's pigweed for those who don't know, and kochia and other things. It's keeping them at bay. It doesn't even let them germinate. It keeps them shaded. Pat, you want to take a stab at this conversation too?
Yeah.
Well, since Wes copied my homework, I'll go down another rabbit hole.
Verbatim.
One of the things that we've discovered, everybody wants to talk about the economics of conserving water. By and large in the state of Kansas, due to well depth and other things, our pumping costs are low enough per acre foot that, if you save, 3 acre feet of water, that's about $15 an acre. It's not a huge savings compared to the cost of under applying and putting that crop in a deficit situation and negatively impacting yield. The cover crops, and some of what we do on our farm is counterintuitive. In our soybean program, we've been since probably 1995. We've still got a couple of fields that have not had a tillage tool in them since 1995. It's been no-till, ridge-till, strip-till, you name it. Our soybean program with our friend the pigweed, we wanted to go to 7.5-inch rows on our soybeans, so we invested in a John Deere air seeder. The challenge no-tilling into corn stubble with that is that in our sandy soils, in real soils like they have here, you can cut that residue, place that seed in a clean trench, and close it back up. In our soils, you basically mash that corn residue down into the seed slot, you drop a soybean in it, and then you pump 3 inches of water on that circle trying to get them up. We started pulling a disc to save 3 inches of water because it improves our seed to soil contact, improves germination. Then we get those beans up about that tall, we've got the soil canopied already, and we eliminate a herbicide pass. In our burn down program, since you can't kill anything with Roundup other than thyme anymore, you've got burn down scenarios where in corn stubble, we've had burn down passes because of mare's tail and other weeds that are running up close to $50 an acre. If we've got those fields cover crop back to rye, the only thing that's growing out there is the rye because of the natural herbicide effect of that plant, and Roundup will still kill rye. So we've got a $15 an acre burn down pass rather than a $50. From a nutrient management standpoint, we participated in several nitrogen trials over the last several years, and we're down to applying 1 pound of N per harvested bushel of corn, which last year at $1.10 a unit for nitrogen, there's another $40 an acre back in our pocket. And the reason we think that works is twofold. One, that the root structure of that cover crop rye is tying up nitrogen at the time of application. And then as that rye plant breaks down, it continues to release that nitrogen out, thus making us much more efficient. The peripheral benefits of doing these things in terms of ROI are extremely beneficial to having a competitive operation if a guy will sit down and run the numbers. But I'm a firm believer. I sat through the one-day water college down in Lubbock, Texas here several years ago, and that's a producer-driven research program down there that they run. And one of them was talking about in his fields where he was planting in to burn down cover crops, I believe July 20th, Bushland, Texas. You know, no risk of snow in that area at that time. But in the soils where they had a good established dead cover crop in the field, they were looking at soil temperatures somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 92 degrees. And on the bare ground conventional till, they were seeing soil temperatures in excess of 120 degrees, just because of that, the radiation, sun, and that's got to save moisture. Wes and I have been struggling with a way to quantify that, but I mean, those are the kind of things that I sit there and ponder when I should be doing something productive.
Yeah.
Can I add?
Wes? Yeah.
Key to what Pat just said is also where our water quality elements are at. I've been a long-term advocate of this because I'm a pro-production agriculture. I come out of that. I was married into it for a long, long time. When you begin to manage your resources and you begin to be and you can look at it from a financial vantage point, conservation is a natural byproduct of good management and production agriculture. The other thing it does is there's less passes of the herbicide, there's less carryover nutrients, which is that's what's running off in our watersheds east to west. That's also what's leaching into our groundwater supplies in some places. As producers begin to manage all this, some of these other problems that we're fighting go away.
Yeah. Anything you guys want to add about infield management practices?
Yeah, well, one thing I'd add to that is on the irrigation scheduling. If we do more residue, more soil health, and increase that intake rate of that soil, that makes our rainfall more effective. So if we can put an extra inch of rainfall into that profile versus having it run off, that gives you more moisture for your crop to raise on. It stops that runoff and that downstream water quality issue that we get from runoff. So increasing that intake rate and holding that water on the ground is another big benefit of surface management.
Well, one of the questions that came through, we talked a lot about water quantity as it relates to groundwater conditions in western Kansas, but there are some lessons to be learned from those that are irrigating from a surface water management system, so in the Bostwick Irrigation District in north central Kansas. So in particular, Pat, one thing that kind of related to this, our compliance with Nebraska in that compact that feeds into Bostwick includes Nebraska taking surface flows from a high flow area and delivering them into the stream. That's happening in the Rattlesnake Basin, correct? You know, purchasing water rights in one area to be able to inject in a stream. What role do you think that plays in water quantity management?
Okay, what she's talking about is the proposed augmentation project through Groundwater Management District number 5 to supplement stream flow into the refuge with water from a well field. And I guess that is a critical piece of the puzzle out there. The entire problem up there comes down to 2 points, but the primary one is timing. And when everybody gets fired up pumping water in that area, and that's an extremely sustainable area. Many of the wells in that area are still at pre-production levels, you know, when they were developed in the 1970s. The aquifer, typically you're anywhere from 30 to 50 feet to water in that area. It's extremely sandy, so the recharge is very high. But when everybody gets fired up, they pull that water table down about 3 feet, which pulls it below that stream bed, at which point the stream quits flowing. That happens, you know, July and August. The stream flow starts to come back in September. October, it's back up. November, life is good again. The problem we have is the habitat management at Quivira. When they're developing their food plots for the shorebirds that they get out there, they're literally going out and farming, I believe, 2,500 or 3,000 acres, seeding food plots for these birds so that they've got a place to stop, rest, eat on their journey back south and that time of year. So at their peak production time, we've got the creek pulled down, so they don't have water for their food plots. The augmentation project, which is in the middle of an environmental impact study, which I have learned to be afraid of, even though I'm not sure what it is. We're working our way through that process to get the ability to augment groundwater out of an extremely sustainable area into the creek so that the refuge can utilize that at times of peak demand to do food production. Did that answer the question, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it does play a role.
If you had to restore the flow in the Rattlesnake Creek strictly by reducing irrigation in that area, it would be absolutely devastating. So the augmentation, and don't get me wrong, we're not saying augmentation is the only answer. We're still working to reduce groundwater use. We're looking at programs to lease and purchase water rights in the high impact zone. We're working on other things. But in terms of the quickest, most efficient fix for this thing to get fish and wildlife where they need to be in their production schedule, the augmentation is kind of the silver bullet in that scenario.
Excellent. Thanks, Pat. Well, one thing I'd like to close with today is just to hear from each of the panelists. What's one takeaway that you hope the audience members leave this panel discussion with today? One thing you'd like to make sure when they go into the break, when they go home for their Thanksgiving holiday, that they remember or think about from today's panel discussion? Start with you.
I think the big takeaway for me is that we're all on the same team here. I want to thank KACD for providing this venue. It's been great to get all the partners together and have these conversations. We need to work together on big issues. It's big to the economy. It's big to our natural resources. When we first started really expanding our partner base, I wasn't sure where that was going, but now it's becoming crystal clear that with everything we have in front of us, that these partnerships are critical. So we need to continue that conversation. We need to work together with our partners to make big things happen.
Well, in the spirit of stealing homework, Larry just stole mine, but no, yeah, ditto what he said. But, one thing that I've, really been kind of preaching to a lot of my stakeholders in Northwest Kansas is, irrigation does use the majority of the water. And so, we have a problem. And so, but, you may not be, something, a contributor to the problem, but we can all be a part of the solution. And that takes literally everybody to be a part of that solution and to work together and to definitely keep these partnerships open. And just the communication is just so key into knowing what's out there and who can help with what and who can be dependable and being, somebody that we can go to and producers can go to when they need that help to definitely remedy this problem.
A takeaway, Pat?
I guess my message would be don't lose hope. We've talked about each other copying our homework here. That's because you've got a group of people sitting here in front of you that have got the same vision. We've got more people and more resources in place right now to go out and fix these problems than we've ever had before. When we started out with the Water Tech Farm program 10, 12 years ago, whatever it was, funding was a real issue, and this has come to the forefront. So the biggest challenge we've got right now is we need people. I mean, the biggest thing you can put in a field to save water is your shadow. I don't remember who told me that, but you've got to be out there. You've got to be paying attention. We need people who can communicate on a meaningful level, have practical experience, and can increase producer engagement. So, given the opportunity, Kansas farmers are some of the sharpest in the world. They'll figure it out. But occasionally a few dollars and a little bit of guidance helps.
Yeah, I'll echo what Pat just said, and what Shannon said, and what Larry said, and that is, it's time to get things done, folks. Like, this is the best time to get things done. All of us in this room have been working our entire careers to see where we're at now. We've been perfecting practices. Everybody's doing their part, doing their share, covering up acres, BMPs, water quantity, water quality legislation. The fundings are there on the Fed level, the state level, the educational level. We can get anything done we want in the state of Kansas. And the other thing I want to echo is, Kansas farmers are among the world's best, most innovative, most effective. Other states don't even meter their water, Jim, right? We are at the forefront. The world is watching what we do. The world is watching how we handle this. They're watching our attitudes. They're looking at our innovation. They're looking at how we're going across the aisle and working with each other. I am excited to be working on some of the projects we're working on are very daunting, but I think we have the solutions. That's it. I'm encouraged. So Pat's saying don't lose hope. I'm actually motivated by all this.
Awesome. Brian, bring it home.
Yep, and so I agree with that comment. There's a lot of optimism out there when you look across the partnership. Everybody, back to our colorful speaker yesterday, rowing in the same direction, right? And we are rowing in the same direction. People are excited about this. There's a lot of optimism. We've got leadership when we look at Senator Moran and the governor, and we got the state legislatures, and then we've got back to President Linton at K-State. There is a lot of leadership that is aligned to make things happen, and it's an exciting time. Back to the comments, the challenges are there, absolutely. We have to go out there and make things happen, but the resources are available, and we can move forward in the right direction and make some things happen, and people are working together.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our panelists, but especially thank you to each of you for engaging with the QR code, for sharing your really great, thoughtful questions. I enjoyed hearing the responses from your questions from this great group of people, and I hope that you feel encouraged by their comments and know that they are your resources also as we tackle this really important challenge, reducing water use and improving water quantity in Kansas. So if you will, please help me thank our panelists as we head into the break.